Hey there. Forget the fairy tales you were raised on. The truth is darker and strangely quieter. Tonight, hold 3 images in your mind, just for a moment, like 3 soft sparks hovering above the candle flame. A proper lady hiding an amber bottle inside the hollow of a Bible, a baby soothed by a syrup so sweet that breath itself forgets its rhythm, and a death that looks like ordinary fatigue, a woman seated neatly in her chair, an empty vial warming the slack curve of her palm. If you find peace in this darkness, leave a like. And if you'd like more nights beside this fire, you can subscribe. There are many slow stories ahead. Now, let the room dim. Let the phone glow fade if it can. Let your shoulders loosen as if someone has unfastened a small knot at the back of your neck. Unclench your jaw. Rest your tongue. Feel the weight of the blanket, or the sheet, or even just the air on your skin. I'll speak slowly, hypnotically. Like a match burning down to its last quiet ember, I'm sitting beside the hearth in a dark room, and the candlelight is thin, so thin it feels like it might snap if I breathe too hard. The fire has its own language. A soft crack, a gentle sigh, a sudden little pop as sap inside the wood gives up and turns to heat. The warmth moves toward us in waves, not rushing, not demanding, just arriving. And the past arrives like that too. Not with trumpets, not with banners. It comes as a daily habit. A polite word printed on a label, a doctor's confident nod, a bottle placed carefully on a silver tray. Victorian respectability, they like to say, was spotless. Lace curtains, proper teacups, women whose hands never smelled of anything harsher than lavender water. And yet, honestly, some of the most devastating epidemics in history did not sweep through alleys or battlefields. They slipped through drawing rooms. They hid in medicine cabinets. They settled into the private hours between midnight and dawn. Close your eyes, if you want, and let me take your hand into the fog of the 19th century. First, London. Fog there wasn't like the friendly mist above a river. It was thicker, dirtier, a living thing that tasted faintly of coal and damp wool. Gas lamps stood along the streets like sleepy sentries, each casting a small pool of yellow light onto wet cobblestones. Horse hooves clicked, carriage wheels hissed through puddles. Somewhere far away, a church bell counted time with a weary certainty. Now, a chemist's shop, a narrow doorway, dark timber, glass panes clouded by breath and winter. Inside, shelves climbed toward the ceiling, crowded with bottles and tins and little cardboard boxes that promised relief with elegant lettering, soothing, cordial, restorative, lady's friend, nerve tonic, infant quieting syrup, words that feel like a warm hand on the forehead. You know that feeling, don't you? When a place looks clean and orderly, and you assume it cannot hurt you. When the neatness itself feels like proof. A polished counter, a careful clerk, a respectable address, safety by appearance. That's how it began for so many women. Not with vice, not with scandal, with pain, with exhaustion so deep it felt like the bones had become heavy stone. With the aches of childbirth, the relentless work of running a household, the silent duty of smiling through days that offered no permission to fall apart, Victorian women were expected to endure. That was the rule written between every line of etiquette. Endure the long labor. Endure the baby's crying. Endure the husband's needs. Endure grief and boredom and loneliness without ever letting the mask slip. And then someone offered them escape in a bottle. Just a few drops, the doctor would say. A little amber liquid in water, morning and evening. Something to calm the nerves. Something to restore the spirits. Something to make the mind stop clawing at itself. It tasted bitter. But the warmth that followed, that warmth was persuasive. Tonight, The first woman we meet is named Charlotte Winslow. Think of her as a symbol. Yes, yet I want her to feel like a real presence beside us. Because women like her existed in Boston, in Bath, in Manchester, in Yorkshire, in houses that looked stable from the outside and were quietly collapsing from within. Boston, 1853. The air there carries salt from the harbour. In winter, the cold has sharp edges. A proper home smells faintly of beeswax and linen and wood smoke. Floors creak in familiar places, especially the third step on the staircase, the one everyone learns to avoid when the baby is sleeping. Curtains are white lace, trembling when the draught sneaks in through imperfect window frames. Charlotte is exactly what society calls a proper lady. She keeps accounts. She plans meals. She manages servants with calm authority. She raises 3 children with a gentleness that never becomes chaos. She attends charitable functions. She knows how to hold a teacup so the handle aligns with her fingers like a practiced gesture of peace. And behind the closed bedroom door, she is failing. Not morally, not spiritually, physically. After the birth of her youngest daughter, her body becomes unfamiliar terrain. Her back aches with a deep, dragging pain that makes standing feel like punishment. Her abdomen tightens without warning. Her hands shake sometimes, not dramatically, just enough to spill a few drops of tea and then flush her cheeks with shame. At night she lies in bed while the house sleeps, and she listens to the faint tick of a clock in the hall. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound, a tiny hammer tapping the same nail deeper into wood. She cannot rest. Her mind runs in small circles. Did she fold the linens? Did she pay the milkman? Did she smile enough at the rector's wife? Did she speak too sharply to the cook? Did she ruin the children by being tired? A doctor arrives in the afternoon, smelling of leather gloves and clean alcohol and winter air. He speaks with the kind of certainty that makes people relax. Nervous exhaustion, he calls it. Delicate constitution. Female complaint. Words that mean we do not know, but we will treat it anyway. He places a bottle on the table. Glass, thick and clear. A cork stopper. A cream label with neat script, laudanum. Charlotte does not know the word in her bones. She doesn't know that it is opium, dissolved into alcohol, made into a liquid so convenient and respectable it could sit beside the sugar bowl. She only knows pain. And the promise of quiet that evening, when the children are finally asleep and the lamps have been turned low, she pours a small measure of water into a glass. The water is cool. It catches the lamplight and holds it like a pale coin. Her fingers, slightly trembling, uncork the bottle. A scent rises, sweet, medicinal, faintly floral, faintly bitter, like dried poppies, like something ancient. She tips it carefully, 1 drop, then another, then a third. The amber spreads in the water like a slow sunset. She stirs with a spoon. The spoon clicks once against glass, a small bright sound in a quiet room. She drinks. The bitterness touches her tongue first, sharp as truth. Then the warmth arrives. It moves through her chest like a gentle hand, smoothing the tightness. Her shoulders lower without her noticing. Her thoughts, those frantic birds, settle on a branch and stop fluttering. For the first time in weeks, she feels peace. And that is the beginning of the tragedy. Because peace, when it comes too easily, is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a hook. Days pass. Charlotte continues her duties. She smiles at visitors. She reads to the children. She keeps the household running with the same polished precision. And every morning and every evening, she takes her drops. At first, the doses work perfectly. But the human body is not naive. It learns. It adapts. It demands more. Within weeks, the old amount no longer reaches the same quiet. The warmth still comes, but it is thinner, as if the medicine has begun to whisper instead of sing. Charlotte finds herself watching the clock, counting the hours. You know that feeling when time becomes something you stare at, not something you live inside. When the day is no longer a day, but a hallway leading to a moment of relief. She adds an extra dose at noon, then one in the late afternoon, then in the night. Let me show you the night. Picture Charlotte waking before dawn. The house is a black shape, heavy and still. The air in the bedroom is cold enough to sting the inside of her nose. Her husband's breathing is steady, unaware, his chest rising and falling like a tide that has never heard of storms. From the nursery comes a tiny sound, maybe the baby shifting, maybe only the wind touching the window. Charlotte's eyes are open, not because she wants to be awake, but because her body is calling for something. Her muscles ache in a different way now, a restless ache, as if each bone is trying to crawl out of itself. Her skin prickles. A thin sweat breaks along her hairline, even though the room is cold. She sits up slowly, careful not to shake the bed. The floor is icy under her feet. She reaches for her shawl. Wool scratches gently at her arms. She stands. And for a moment her heart bumps hard in her chest, an anxious thud that feels like warning. She crosses the room. One step. Two. The boards creak softly. A complaint from old wood. She pauses, listening. The baby is quiet. Her husband does not stir. She opens the drawer where she has hidden the bottle. Hidden, yes, because somewhere inside her, a small voice has begun to feel shame. Not loud shame, a quiet shame. The kind that makes you close a drawer gently, makes you hide something behind linens, makes you pretend you do not need what you need. She uncorks it. The scent rises again. And her body relaxes at the smell alone, as if the aroma itself is a promise. She pours the drops into water, drinks quickly, and waits. Within minutes the ache loosens. Her thoughts soften at the edges. The cold becomes less cruel. She returns to bed and slides under the blanket, like someone slipping beneath warm water. She sleeps. In the morning, she is a proper lady again. No one suspects, and why would they? Laudanum is not sold in back alleys. It is displayed on respectable counters. It is printed in newspaper advertisements. It is recommended by physicians who wear clean collars and speak of health and balance. There are dozens of names for it, hiding the same dark heart. Godfrey's cordial for teething infants, Dover's powder for headaches, soothing syrups for female complaints, tinctures for melancholy, a whole world of opium in polite clothing. And so, quietly, an epidemic begins. Not in the slums first, not in the opium dens people whisper about, but in the drawing rooms where lace curtains glow in daylight, in the bedrooms where women lie awake beside sleeping husbands, in nurseries where exhausted mothers rock babies with hollow eyes. Charlotte does not know she is joining a vast, hidden sisterhood of dependence. She believes, as many do, that her struggle is personal, a failure of will, a weakness of constitution. And that belief, honestly, might be the cruelest part, because it keeps her silent. It keeps her alone. It keeps the bottle close. Let the fire crackle for a moment. Let the candle tremble. Let your breathing slow. We're only at the threshold. The story will deepen. The fog will thicken. The respectable faces will become masks. For now, just rest with the knowledge that in a world obsessed with propriety, the darkest poisons arrived wearing the gentlest names. The strange thing about dependence is how it hides inside routine. If you were to watch Charlotte through the eyes of a visitor, someone arriving for tea on a bright afternoon, you might see nothing alarming at all. The parlour would be tidy. The carpet would be brushed in careful strokes, leaving those faint parallel lines that make a room look newly settled. The teapot would steam softly. sending up a scent of black leaves and hot porcelain. The children's voices would drift in from another room, muffled laughter like birds behind a hedge. Charlotte would sit straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her smile placed perfectly where it belonged. She would ask about your family. She would remember the name of your aunt. She would offer a small laugh at exactly the right moment. And yet, if you stayed long enough, you might notice she excused herself more often than necessary, not dramatically, not in a way that would break the rules of politeness, just a little too frequently, as if her body had appointments she never discussed. You know that kind of disappearance, don't you? When someone slips away and returns with the same face, but something in the eyes has shifted, like a lamp turned down a fraction, like a curtain drawn a little more tightly. It begins with tolerance, the body's quiet mathematics. The first doses were a gentle key. Now the lock has changed. Charlotte starts measuring with more attention, more seriousness, the way people measure something precious. She keeps the bottle where her husband will not see it. Not because he would forbid it. He trusts doctors, trusts labels, trusts the era's faith in progress. But because Charlotte has begun to fear the look in his eyes, if he knew how often she reaches for relief. In the morning, before the household fully wakes, she takes a dose to smooth the day into something bearable. The kitchen is still dim. Ash from last night's fire lies in the grate like grey snow. The servants move quietly, a broom whispering, a kettle beginning to murmur. Charlotte stands by the window for a moment, the glass cold under her fingertips, watching the pale winter light find its way across the street. The dose settles in her chest like a warm stone. She feels capable. At least, she feels like she can pretend. By late morning, the warmth thins. The edges of her thoughts sharpen again. Irritation arrives without reason. A child's small cry becomes too loud. A spoon clinking in a bowl becomes a hammer. The air itself feels tight, as if the room has shrunk. She watches the clock. She tells herself she will wait. She tries. But then her hands begin to tremble, not enough for anyone else to see, perhaps, but enough for her to feel. And that is what matters. The stomach turns with a soft nausea that sits low and persistent. A thin anxiety crawls up her throat and makes swallowing feel strange. So she excuses herself. A polite phrase, a gentle smile, just a moment. She goes to the little cupboard where the bottle waits. Sometimes she's careful water, measured drops, a slow sip. Sometimes she's not. Sometimes she drinks straight from the spoon, because the craving has a voice, and it sounds like urgency. And after, she returns to the parlour, calm again, composed again, the proper lady, restored. That is how dependence becomes invisible. It creates a version of you that looks functional, and it demands you return to that version again and again, like a stage actor forced to step back into the light, no matter how tired the body becomes. Months pass, and Charlotte discovers other women have bottles too, not openly, not with confession, but with small signals, a glance that lingers on a medicine label a little too long, a remark about nerves said with too much familiarity, a hostess who offers tea, and then, in a softer tone, mentions a tonic that helps one cope. They do not say addiction. That word belongs to gamblers, to drunkards, to men in the street. Respectable women are not addicts. They are delicate. They are nervous. They are unwell. Charlotte learns the language of euphemism the way she learned embroidery stitches as a girl, patiently, carefully, until it becomes second nature. When she takes more, she calls it a difficult day. When she wakes sweating in the night, she calls it a spell. When she feels despair so thick it seems to press down on her ribs, she calls it melancholy. And because society expects women to suffer quietly, no one challenges these words. In Yorkshire, far away, another woman lives a parallel life. Margaret Thornfield, a minister's wife. I want you to picture her too, not as a name on a page, but as a body moving through rooms. Her home is colder, stone walls holding winter the way a grave holds silence. The wind whistles through cracks in the window frame. The church bells are louder there, and the village watches its women with a particular kind of moral patience, but strict. Margaret begins with pain that doctors cannot explain. They call it neuralgia, a word that sounds scientific and therefore comforting. She takes laudanum. It helps, at first. She becomes energetic, even joyful. She organizes charity drives. She visits the sick. People praise her renewed vigor. The minister smiles with pride, believing God has blessed his household. But in the quiet hours, Margaret begins to wake drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if she has been chased. She lies in bed staring at the ceiling beams, feeling panic arrive for no reason. She counts the minutes until she can take another dose without seeming improper. During the day, she watches the clock the way a starving person watches bread rise. When she tries to reduce, her body revolts. Her hands shake hard enough to rattle a teacup on its saucer. Her stomach cramps. Nausea comes in waves that leave her dizzy. And the despair feels like a black tide, rising and rising until it fills the whole mind and leaves no air. Margaret believes she is dying. Her husband believes she is ill. The doctor believes the symptoms mean she needs more medicine. That is the Victorian loop. Withdrawal is mistaken for illness, and the cure becomes the chain. Back in Boston, Charlotte is caught in the same loop. She runs a household while her body quietly negotiates with an invisible master. She begins to hide bottles in places that surprise even her behind books. Inside a sewing basket, tucked into a hat box beneath ribbons that smell faintly of lavender. Sometimes, with a strange burst of resolve, she pours a portion down the sink. You can hear it, can't you? The soft glug-glug as the amber liquid disappears into the drain. The faint scent rising, bitter and sweet, like something wasted. For a moment, she feels proud. Then the withdrawal begins. Her skin feels too tight. Her muscles ache as if she has climbed a mountain. Her mind becomes a room full of buzzing flies. She cannot focus on a sentence, cannot settle her gaze, cannot soothe the baby without snapping. And so, trembling, she sends a servant to the chemist. "Medicine for my nerves," she says, with a smile that begs not to be questioned. The servant returns with a fresh bottle. Charlotte drinks, peace returns, and the shame deepens. What makes this tragedy so insidious is how normalized it is. Laudanum sits beside respectable medicines. Patent syrups for babies are advertised as loving tools for mothers. Women dose teething infants to keep them quiet, to keep the household calm, to keep the world from seeing how hard it is to be human. Sometimes the baby sleeps too deeply, sometimes the baby does not wake. But the death is written down as weak constitution, as sudden illness, as God's will. And the bottle remains innocent looking, clean labeled, waiting to be used again. Let the fire breathe beside us. Let the candlelight soften the edges of these rooms. In the next part of this story, we will step deeper into the elaborate performances, how women hid their dependence behind charity events and tea parties, how families protected reputations with lies whispered over coffins, how doctors, confused and confident, kept prescribing the very thing that was stealing their patients' lives. For now, just drift. Because even in the darkest history, the rhythm is slow, like a clock, like rain. And the quiet can still hold you. If you listen closely to old houses, you can hear where secrets like to live. They live in drawers that don't quite close, in floorboards that complain only at night, in the thin gap behind a row of books, where dust gathers in a patient grey line. And in Victorian homes that wore respectability like perfume, there was one secret that learned to move as softly as breath, the sound of a cork being eased from a bottle. Charlotte's world, over in Boston, is only one side of the ocean. The other side is London, and London has its own appetite. It eats coal, it eats time, it eats people, slowly, and then pretends it never did. Come with me there. Picture the city at dusk, the hour when the daylight doesn't end so much as it gives up. The streets are damp, the fog sits low, pressed against the stones like a tired animal. Carriages roll by with the wet hush of wheels in mud, and every time a hoof strikes, you hear that small, sharp click, then a softer, smeared echo as the sound disappears into mist. I always feel a little strange when I imagine Victorian London, because it's both crowded and lonely at the same time. A city full of bodies, and yet each person wrapped in their own private weather. The smell is layered: coal smoke and horse sweat, damp wool, frying fat from a street stall, and underneath it all, a sour note waste, river water, the city's hidden breath. Now, a particular street. Not the East End yet, not the dens people like to whisper about. A respectable street where the houses have tidy facades and the windows show hints of lamplight behind curtains. The kind of street where a lady might step from a carriage with a gloved hand resting lightly on a husband's sleeve. She is called Eleanor Hartwell. The name itself feels polished, doesn't it? Eleanor Hartwell. Like a silver spoon, like a signature at the bottom of a charity donation. Her morning begins in a bedroom with heavy curtains. The fabric is thick enough to turn sunlight into a dull gold. When she wakes, the sheets are cool against her skin, and her body feels wrong. Not sick in a way that can be pointed to, not a fever, not a wound, just a heavy, aching wrongness, as if someone has poured sand into her joints during the night. She lies there for a moment, listening. A cart rattles outside. A man calls out to a horse. Somewhere in the house, a maid moves a coal scuttle, the metal scraping softly. The sound should be ordinary, comforting even. But Eleanor's mind is already searching for the bottle. Not the main bottle, not the one in the cabinet that everyone knows about. That one has a label and the doctor's approval. It sits proudly beside tonics and salts. No, Eleanor's mind goes to the hidden one. The one tucked inside the hollow of a hat box beneath tissue paper that smells faintly of lavender and starch. You know that feeling, don't you? When the first thought of the day isn't the day at all, it's the thing you need in order to face the day. The way the mind reaches for it like a hand reaching for a railing in the dark. She doesn't move yet. She tells herself she'll wait. She tells herself she's fine. She tells herself she is a lady, and ladies do not need this. Then her stomach tightens. A thread of nausea runs up her throat. Her skin prickles with a restless heat, even though the room is cool. Her heart begins to knock in her chest, quick and sharp, like it's trying to warn her of something. So she rings for her maid, Mary O'Brien. Mary is young enough that her cheeks still hold the softness of youth, but old enough that her eyes have learned to watch carefully. She has been in service long enough to understand what can be said and what must be swallowed. She moves quietly, like someone trained not to disturb the furniture with her presence. When Mary enters, she curtsies. Eleanor smiles, a gentle smile, practiced, smooth. I didn't sleep well, Eleanor says, as if that is the whole story. Mary nods. Mary has heard this before. Mary brings the morning tray, tea, toast, a small dish of marmalade that catches the light like amber. And also, if Eleanor is careful with her words, medicine. At first, Eleanor's opium came by proper roots, a physician for nervous exhaustion, a few drops to calm her, a label that made it respectable. But respectability has a curious weakness. It cannot endure the arithmetic of tolerance. So Eleanor's doses became more frequent. The doctor's instructions became a suggestion. The bottle became smaller in her mind and larger in her life. Mary is sent out. Not to the same chemist each time. That would look suspicious. Not to the closest shop. Not to the one on the corner where the clerk knows the household. Eleanor sends Mary on little pilgrimages across the city, a shop near the square, another near the river, a third beside a church, where the bells ring loudly enough to shake dust from the stone. Mary carries lists written in Eleanor's neat hand, headache powders, sleeping draughts, stomach soothers, a cordial for a cousin, a remedy for the cook, a tonic for a nervous sister, all perfectly reasonable, all perfectly polite. Mary never questions it, because questioning is dangerous, and because, honestly, the world around her insists these medicines are normal. They sit behind counters in bright bottles. They are advertised in newspapers that respectable men read at breakfast. They are recommended by physicians who wear clean collars and speak with warm authority. So Mary returns with parcels wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. And Eleanor, in her private room, opens them with hands that try not to tremble. Here is where the secret grows teeth. Eleanor begins to take laudanum not as a treatment, but as a clock, every 2 hours, like a tide, like a bell. At first, she tells herself she can stop whenever she wants. She is intelligent. She is educated. She is not a criminal. She is not weak. But then she tries to stop. One afternoon, she decides she will delay her dose. She will prove something to herself. She will sit in the drawing room with her embroidery and simply endure. The room is quiet. The curtains move a little in the draught. The needle flashes in her fingers, a small silver fish. The thread slides through cloth with a soft, satisfying pull. Minutes pass. Then her leg begins to twitch, a tiny movement at first, barely noticeable. Then again, her stomach turns. Her mouth tastes sour. She swallows, and swallowing feels difficult, as if her throat has forgotten how to be a throat. A feeling of panic, sharp, unreasonable, rushes in like cold water. She sets the embroidery down, because the needle suddenly feels dangerous, too pointed, too much like a threat. She tells herself to breathe. In, out. But breathing doesn't help, because the panic isn't from thought. It's from chemistry, from a body that has learned to demand. Her hands shake now. She presses her palms against the arms of the chair, trying to steady herself, but the tremor simply travels up her bones like a nervous message. She stands. The room sways. She walks, quickly, to the place where she has hidden the bottle. The floorboards creak. She doesn't care. She pours the drops into water. Too many. She knows it even as she does it, but the need has taken over. The amber blooms in the glass like a bruise. She drinks. Within minutes, the world softens. The edges blur into something gentle. Her muscles unclench. Her thoughts stop clawing. And in that moment, she feels relief so deep it almost feels like gratitude. That gratitude that is the hook. Eleanor's days become a series of small calculations. When can she dose without being seen? How long until the next wave of withdrawal? Where is the nearest bottle? She begins hiding them everywhere. In her jewelry box, nestled among pearls that no longer feel like luxury, only like cold objects. Behind books in the library, where the smell of old paper and leather seems to absorb secrets. In the lining of her winter coat, sewn into a pocket, so discreet that even her own fingers sometimes fumble to find it. In a vase that no one uses, because the flowers would be too bright for the dimness she prefers now. It's strange, the way addiction makes a home into a map. You stop thinking in terms of rooms and start thinking in terms of hiding places. And the physical changes arrive so gradually that they feel like weather rather than illness. Her complexion fades, not in a romantic way, in a waxy, drained way. Her eyes take on a distant shine, as if she is always looking at something far behind you. Her movements slow. The body becomes heavy, as if the bones have been filled with lead. Sometimes she nods off in the middle of an afternoon visit. A friend is speaking about a charity luncheon, about the proper number of plates, about the flowers that should be arranged just so. And Eleanor's eyelids sink, slow as curtains. Her embroidery slips from her fingers. A polite silence falls. No one mentions it. Victorian society had perfected the art of not seeing. If something is unpleasant, you simply look around it. You step over it like a puddle. So Eleanor's friends begin to speak of her delicate constitution. They refer to her nervous condition with gentle sympathy. They lower their voices as if the illness might be listening. Eleanor learns to use those words as armor. When she disappears to dose in a powder room during a tea party, she says, "Forgive me, feminine indisposition." No one questions it. Politeness is a curtain pulled tight. When she arrives to a social gathering already heavily medicated, smiling too broadly, speaking too slowly, no one calls it drunkenness. They call it fatigue. They call it poor health. They call it the strain of society. And under that soft language, the truth keeps working. The most tragic part, to me, is how the drug steals time. Eleanor begins to lose hours. She will sit by the window watching fog move, and then suddenly the light has shifted and the day is gone. She will begin a sentence and forget where it was going. Halfway through, her mouth left open on a word that doesn't come. She laughs it off. She says, "Oh, my mind is a little tired," but inside, something cold moves. She forgets whether she instructed the cook. She forgets whether she paid the bills. She forgets conversations moments after they end. Mary sees it. The servants see it. The people who live closest to the truth always see it. Mary begins to keep her own list of what has been said, what has been done, because the mistress cannot be relied upon. Mary learns to recognize the cycles. The bright, almost cheerful Eleanor, shortly after dosing, and the irritable, withdrawn Eleanor, when the effects begin to fade. Children notice too. Eleanor has 2 children, and children are quiet observers. They learn quickly when to approach and when to stay away. When mother is soft and smiling, they bring drawings. When mother is sharp-eyed and restless, they retreat like small animals sensing a storm. The house becomes a place where love must be timed. Eleanor's husband, he is a good man in the way Victorian husbands are often described. Kind, naive, trusting. He believes medicine is medicine. He believes his wife is delicate. He believes her virtue is unshakable. He does not imagine addiction can happen in lace. He does not imagine the bottle on the tray could become a chain. Sometimes, at night, he reaches for his wife. He wants comfort, closeness, the simple warmth of a human body beside his. Eleanor takes an extra dose beforehand, not because she wants more pleasure, because she wants less feeling. This is a dark truth, and I have to say it gently, like placing a cold object on a table without letting it clatter. Opium became a way for many women to disappear inside their own lives. To endure intimacy they did not want to float above it, to turn a violation into a fog. Eleanor's husband interprets her passivity as calm, as contentment, as acceptance. And Eleanor, drifting, lets the misunderstanding stand, because explaining would require words she has never been allowed to speak. Months become years, the bottles multiply, the money vanishes in small increments, a few coins here, a few notes there, jewelry sold quietly, household items pawned, accounts adjusted with careful lies. Eleanor becomes skilled at deception the way she once was skilled at hosting. She learns to smile while hiding a bottle in her sleeve. She learns to speak of the weather while her stomach churns with withdrawal. She learns to be a ghost in her own home present in body and absent in mind. And then, one night, the fog is thick enough to press against the windows like hands. Eleanor sits at her breakfast table the next morning, surrounded by fine china and a vase of fresh flowers, and she crushes tablets into her tea because liquid no longer satisfies. I always pause here. I always feel that strange ache in my chest, because the image is so absurd and so devastating. Mahogany table, fine china, fresh flowers, and a lethal dose dissolving into a warm drink while polite conversation continues. Her husband reads the newspaper. He comments on politics, on business, on a neighbour's engagement. Eleanor nods, smiling serenely, as if she has discovered a private paradise. And she has. It is simply a paradise that asks for everything in return. When you're ready, let your breathing slow again. Let the fire's crackle become a lullaby, because Eleanor's story is not ending yet. It is turning. Soon, the respectable streets will not be enough. Soon, the chemist's bottles will feel too weak. Soon, the fog will carry her toward places she never imagined entering. For now, just rest in the quiet horror of how easily a cure can become a ritual, and how silently a ritual can become a ruin. The thing about a city like London is that it offers you 1,000 doors, and it never asks why you knock. Eleanor's respectable street still smells of soap and coal, of polished wood and cooked meat, but the relief in her bottle begins to thin, like tea that has been poured over leaves too many times. She takes her drops and feels calm, yes. Yet beneath the calm there is a restless little itch, a whisper of dissatisfaction. The body learns quickly. The body always learns. And so, without any dramatic decision, without any grand rebellion, the map of her life shifts. It happens the way a crack spreads in glass, slowly, silently, and then suddenly you notice it has reached the edge. One evening, when the lamps are lit early because the fog has swallowed the day, Eleanor sits with her husband in the parlour. A fire pops softly. The room is warm. The wallpaper glows faintly in the lamplight, patterned with vines and flowers that never grow. Her husband speaks about a dinner invitation, a colleague's home, a respectable gathering. He wants her there, smiling, present, alive, in the role she has always played. Eleanor nods. She tries to imagine herself among the polite laughter, the clink of glasses, the little gasps of gossip behind fans, and her stomach turns, not from fear of society, from fear of time, from fear of the gap between doses. She excuses herself with that same gentle phrase, "I'm feeling a little unwell," and she climbs the stairs slowly, one step at a time, as if each step weighs more than the last. The stair carpet muffles her feet. The banister is smooth beneath her fingers, polished by years of hands like hers. In her bedroom, she takes her laudanum. She waits for the softness. It comes, but weaker. She takes more. Still, the relief is thin, like a veil. She sits on the edge of the bed, breathing through her nose, trying not to cry. It's odd, really, how tears can feel like a failure of etiquette. Even alone, she tries to be composed. Mary knocks, a quiet knock, careful. Eleanor tells her to enter. Mary's eyes flick to the bedside table, the glass, the bottle. Mary doesn't stare, because staring is rude, but she sees. She always sees. "Ma'am," Mary says softly, "there's a message from the chemist. They say they cannot fill another order so soon. They ask if perhaps you might speak to your physician." Eleanor's throat tightens. There it is, the first hint of resistance, the first closed door. It would be easy, in a story, to make Eleanor storm down the stairs, to shout, to declare her independence. But real lives, they don't often break like that. They bend. Eleanor smiles at Mary, a smile that feels like porcelain. "That's all right," she says. We'll find another. And she means it. The next day, Mary is sent farther than usual, past the familiar squares, past the tidy shops, toward Limehouse, where the air tastes of river and fish and tar, towards streets where the pavement is rough and the buildings lean as if they are tired of standing. Mary does not go alone. Eleanor cannot send her into that part of the city without protection, so a footman accompanies her, stiff and silent. They return with a small package, the paper darker, the twine rougher. The smell is different, too sharp, earthy, like something that has been pulled from the ground. Raw opium. Eleanor holds it in her gloved hand as if it might burn through the leather. She should be horrified. She is, for a moment. Then the familiar ache rises in her bones and the horror becomes practical. She learns quickly. She learns from desperation, which is a harsh teacher. Soon she is no longer satisfied with drops in water. Soon she wants the deeper dream. This is where the story often changes tone in people's minds. They imagine scandal, wildness, a woman throwing away her reputation with a laugh. But I want you to feel how quiet it is, how sad, how tired. On the night Eleanor goes to an opium den for the first time, she does not dress like a woman seeking adventure. She dresses like a woman going to a funeral. Plain clothing, dark cloak, her hair pinned low, no jewelry, nothing that can catch the light and reveal her. A closed carriage takes her. The horse's hooves make dull, wet thuds. The driver says nothing. The fog wraps the carriage like a blanket, and Eleanor sits inside, listening to the faint creak of leather and wood, feeling the wheel's vibrations travel up through the seat and into her spine. Her hands are cold. She tells herself she is only going once, just enough to reset herself, to find relief, to return to normal. I always find that lie heartbreakingly human. The mind's desire to imagine a temporary escape, even when the body has already built a prison. The carriage stops, the door opens. The air outside is colder, thicker, smelling of river, mud and smoke and something sweet, incense, maybe, or the residue of opium itself. Eleanor steps down. The street is narrow, the buildings are close. A lantern swings on a hook, its light trembling. Shadows gather in the corners, like silent listeners. A man gestures to a side entrance. No sign, no advertisement, just a door that looks like any other door, except for how carefully it is watched inside. The warmth is different from her home's warmth. It is not the clean heat of a parlor fire. It is damp, heavy, like breath trapped in fabric. There are rooms lined with cushions, low lamps, faces half lit, people lying as if asleep, but not sleeping, not quite. Chinese laborers, sailors, men with rough hands, women too, and among them, to Eleanor's shock, a lady's silhouette, a gloved hand resting on a silk cushion, a well-dressed wrist, a familiar posture of refinement, even in ruin. Class dissolves in this dimness. All that matters is the shared hunger for quiet. Eleanor is offered a pipe. Her fingers hesitate. The pipe is warm from other mouths. The thought should disgust her. But her hands are already moving. She lies down. The cushion smells faintly of sweat and perfume, a strange blend of other people's lives. The fabric presses against her cheek. She feels the heat of her own breath as it leaves her mouth and returns to her skin. She inhales. The smoke is harsh at first, scratching her throat. She coughs, eyes watering. Then the dream arrives. It doesn't rush, it unfurls. A warmth spreads through her chest, down her arms, into her hands. The ache in her bones softens. The panic quiets as if someone has placed a gentle palm against it. The room melts into a soft blur of shadows and lamplight. The fog outside seems far away. Even the idea of time becomes distant. like a memory. Eleanor sighs, and the sigh is not happiness, it is surrender. She returns again and again. Sometimes she pays for a private room because she cannot bear to be seen too clearly. Sometimes she tells herself she is being careful, that she is still in control. But control is a myth that addiction tells the respectable. There is another woman whose story moves through the same fog, Elizabeth Morrison, judge's daughter, educated, proper. The kind of name that opens doors and closes mouths. Elizabeth begins, like so many, with a prescription, a physician who refuses to increase it, a line drawn in ink. And so Elizabeth crosses lines in shadow. She comes to the dens disguised, accompanied by a trusted servant. She slips through back entrances, moving quickly, head down, as if shame itself has weight and she is trying not to carry it. The first time she lies among strangers on silk cushions, she feels her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She is afraid, yes, but also relieved, because the relief is always stronger than the fear. That is the trick, isn't it? The relief teaches you that fear can be endured, as long as the relief arrives afterward. Elizabeth's tolerance grows. The opium in the dens is stronger than the medicines in her cabinet. She measures doses with a mind already blurred. She convinces herself she understands her own body's arithmetic. On a November evening, fog so thick it turns street lamps into pale moons. Elizabeth takes what she thinks is her usual amount, and this time she does not return. A servant finds her in the morning, lips slightly parted as if she is about to speak, skin cooled, eyes closed. The den's proprietor understands the danger of scandal. A dead judge's daughter in his rooms could destroy him. It could bring police. It could bring attention. Attention is the enemy of any hidden trade. So the body is moved quietly, carefully, wrapped as if in sleep. Elizabeth is carried back to a respectable address before daylight fully settles. Before the city wakes enough to notice, her family discovers her and chooses silence. The physician is called. He looks at her and sees what it is, or perhaps he pretends not to. He writes heart failure, nervous exhaustion, a phrase that sounds like weather, like fate, like something no one can blame on anyone. The funeral is arranged. Black silk, slow hymns, the soft creak of pews, the smell of lilies. The minister speaks of delicate constitution and Christian patience. He speaks of charity, of virtue, of a life ended too soon. And I want you to feel the strange double life of such a funeral, because in the crowd there are women who know, not because they were told, because their own bottles are hidden at home, because their own wrists carry the faint marks of needles or the memory of smoke. They stand with gloved hands clasped, listening to words about purity, and they feel a chill in their stomachs that has nothing to do with the church's cold stone. They cannot speak to each other. Victorian etiquette seals their mouths. So they mourn alone, together. In the weeks after a death like Elizabeth's, the house is cleaned, drawers opened, boxes emptied. The private geography of addiction reveals itself. Hidden bottles in hat boxes, behind books, sewn into dress linings, a small diary with trembling handwriting, tally marks climbing day by day. A sister finds it and feels the ground tilt under her. It is always devastating, that moment when the polite story collapses and the true story rises like an unpleasant smell. But most families do not let the smell linger. They burn the diary, they smash the bottles, they speak of illness and God's will, and the epidemic remains quiet. Some physicians, though, could not entirely keep their eyes closed. There is a Dr. William Hartley, who writes in private journals. He does not publish them. He cannot. It would ruin him. It would ruin his patients. It would invite scandal, lawsuits, loss of livelihood. So he writes in secret, by lamplight, while the city sleeps, page after page of names. Mrs. Wells, Mrs. Ashworth, Miss Pembroke, Lady Worthington. The titles change, the symptoms repeat. He writes of dosages that climb like staircase steps into absurd heights, 40 grains a day. More, he writes of women who insist they need the medicine to function. Women who cry when he suggests reduction. Women who appear calm and then collapse into terror when a dose is delayed. He tries, in his own limited way, to help a gradual schedule, a morale lecture, a recommendation for travel, as if scenery can cure chemistry, a rest cure that becomes in practice a quiet sedation. He watches the same pattern over and over. A woman begins with pain or grief, or exhaustion, or the dull ache of a life that allows her no rest. A physician offers a miracle in a bottle. The miracle becomes a ritual. The ritual becomes a cage. The cage becomes death, and the death becomes a polite lie. I always find it unbearable. Honestly, how gentle the lies are. They aren't shouted. They are murmured, soft as prayers, and that softness makes them harder to fight. Eleanor hears about Elizabeth Morrison's death in the way people in her circle hear about such things, as a sigh, as a sentence dropped over tea. Poor Elizabeth, someone says, eyes lowered. Such a fragile constitution. Eleanor's fingers tighten around her cup. The tea is warm, fragrant. Her stomach twists, because she hears the code in the words. She hears what cannot be said, and a thought arrives, quiet as a moth landing on a curtain. That could be me. She smiles anyway. She makes the correct sympathetic sound. She keeps the performance intact. Then she excuses herself, feminine in disposition, and goes to a private room where a bottle waits, hidden behind a row of books. She measures a dose with care, with trembling, with fear. And still she drinks, because the fear of living without it is sharper than the fear of dying with it. If you're listening in bed, let your shoulders sink a little deeper into the mattress. Let your jaw loosen. Imagine the fog outside your window. If you have one, imagine it thick and kind, hiding sharp edges, softening the world. In that fog, Eleanor continues walking, one quiet step at a time, deeper into the city's hidden rooms, and the story continues to unfold like smoke, slow and inevitable. There is a moment, somewhere in the life of an addiction, when the substance stops being the secret and becomes the architect. Eleanor notices it first, in small humiliations, the kind that never make it into public stories. A teaspoon slips from her fingers and clinks against the saucer, too loud in the quiet of morning. A servant's question, simple, harmless, arrives like a riddle she cannot solve. A bill, presented for her signature, looks familiar and strange at the same time, as if the ink has been written in a language she once knew and has now forgotten. And there is the clock. The clock becomes a second heartbeat. Tick, tick, tick. Every tick is not time passing. Not really. Every tick is distance from the last dose. And the mind, so clever, so proud, finds itself reduced to a creature that measures life in intervals of need. You know that feeling, don't you? When you're waiting for something and the waiting itself becomes a physical thing. It sits in your chest. It tightens your throat. It makes you feel too awake, too sharp. That is withdrawal in its quiet disguise. It's not always dramatic, not always convulsions and screams. Often, it is simply a constant alertness, as if danger is about to enter the room. Eleanor begins to plan her days like a thief, not a thief of jewels, no, a thief of minutes, a thief of privacy. If she must attend a luncheon, she counts the hours backward. If she must ride in a carriage, she calculates how long the journey will be and where If necessary, she might excuse herself. If she must sit through a church service, she wonders whether the hymns will be long enough to cover the tremor that starts in her hands when the medicine begins to fade. Sometimes she takes an extra dose beforehand, not because she wants more dream, but because she wants insurance. She wants to remain smooth, presentable. She wants her face to stay arranged the way a lady's face should be arranged, like a portrait that never changes expression. It works until it doesn't. One afternoon, she is invited to a charity tea at a friend's home, the kind of gathering where the women wear soft colors and the men speak in gentle, important voices about donations and reform. There are little cakes powdered with sugar, and the air smells of warm milk and bergamot. Eleanor sits on a velvet chair that is too low, and she can feel the fabric pulling slightly at her skirt. She listens to a woman speak about orphan children with that practiced sadness enough to sound compassionate, not enough to ruin the appetite. Eleanor nods. She smiles. She even offers a comment, a polite little ribbon of speech. And then, without warning, the room shifts. It's subtle at first, like the world has tilted by a degree. The faces around her blur at the edges. The voices stretch out, elongated, as if they are coming through water. Eleanor's tongue feels heavy in her mouth, and she realizes with a cold, sinking awareness that her last dose has struck harder than she intended. She tries to correct herself, to sit straighter, to engage more sharply, to pull her mind back into line like a runaway thread. But the opium has already taken the wheel. Her eyelids droop. The chandelier above seems impossibly bright. The teacup in her hand feels too delicate, as if it might shatter from the pressure of her fingers. She hears someone ask her a question, something small, something about the weather, or a mutual acquaintance, and Eleanor opens her mouth to respond, and words come out slowly, thickly, like syrup. The woman's smile tightens. A pause blooms in the room, not a scandalous pause, not the sort that causes gasps and dramatic exits. A polite pause, the kind that is worse. Eleanor feels heat crawl up her neck. She feels the humiliation like a weight on her chest, even through the drug's softening veil. She wants to flee. She wants to melt into the upholstery, to disappear into the wallpaper's pattern of vines and flowers that never grow. She forces another smile. She says something about feeling unwell, and then, in the quiet choreography of Victorian manners, she is allowed to leave without anyone saying the truth aloud. Her carriage ride home is a blur. She watches the fog smear across the window glass. She sees street lamps as distant halos. She presses her forehead to the cold pane and tells herself, really, truly, she must be more careful. At home, Mary helps her up the stairs. Mary's hand is steady beneath Eleanor's elbow. Mary says nothing. And that silence, Mary's loyal, practiced silence, feels like a condemnation. That night, Eleanor cannot sleep, not because she is restless with pain, but because her mind is buzzing with dread. She replays the afternoon, the pause, the tightened smiles. She imagines rumors. She imagines her name sliding into whispers. Respectable women do not faint at charity teas unless they are truly delicate. Respectable women do not speak slowly unless they are ill. Respectable women do not drift. And yet she did. The next morning, she sends Mary out again, more urgently. Not to the usual chemist's, not even to Limehouse. She sends her to a man whose name is not spoken in polite rooms, Captain Morrison. He's not a captain anymore. Not really. Not in any official sense. But in London, titles can cling to a man long after the uniforms are gone, like the smell of smoke in a coat. His import business deals in spices and herbs. His warehouse smells of cinnamon and pepper, dried orange peel and tar. But tucked among those scents is another one, faint and sweet and dangerous. He supplies pure opium, stronger, cleaner, Reliable. Reliable is what addiction worships. Mary goes with a footman. She returns with a parcel that feels heavier than its size. Eleanor pays without asking questions, because questions are a luxury she no longer has. The first time she uses Captain Morrison's supply, she understands immediately that she has stepped into a deeper current. The relief is profound, the dream is thick, the ache in her bones dissolves as if it was never there. Her mind, for a few precious minutes, feels beautifully empty, no fear, no calculation, no shame, just warmth, quiet, floating. It is almost holy. That is the sick irony of it. The thing destroying her feels like mercy. Soon, Captain Morrison learns what all dealers learn. The richest customers are not always the loudest. The richest customers are often the ones who cannot be seen buying. And those customers are vulnerable in a very specific way. They are terrified of exposure. So Morrison keeps records, quiet ledgers, names written in careful code, quantities, dates, a form of power, inked in secrecy. At first, Eleanor feels grateful for the discretion. A man who understands the rules, a man who delivers through servants, a man who never makes her look directly at the ugliness of the transaction. Then the letters begin. Not official letters, not signed, just a note, slipped into a parcel, written in a hand that is neat and cold. A reminder that he knows what she buys. A reminder that if she stops paying, if she tries to withdraw, if she becomes inconvenient, there are ways a secret can become public. Eleanor reads the note in her bedroom, the curtains drawn. Her fingers go numb. She sits down on the edge of the bed, and the mattress springs whisper under her weight. She feels the room spin, not from opium, but from fear. She had imagined her addiction as a private tragedy. She had not imagined it could become a weapon in someone else's hand. Her first instinct is outrage. How dare he? How could he? She is a lady. She is protected by society. Then she laughs, softly, bitterly, because she realizes society protects her only as long as she remains the image it wants. The moment the image cracks, society will devour her with polite teeth. So she does what so many women do when trapped. She becomes smaller. She complies. She pays. And Captain Morrison, sensing her compliance, tightens the net. His prices rise. His supply becomes more controlled. He offers favors. Not crude favors, not the kind people imagine in sensational stories. No, he offers social favors. He suggests she introduce him to other women. Ladies who might also need discretion. Ladies who might also be quietly desperate. Eleanor resists at first. The idea makes her stomach twist with shame. She imagines herself as a spider luring flies into a web. But the body aches. The body demands. The clock ticks. And shame eventually becomes less painful than withdrawal. So Eleanor begins to recruit. It is done gently, always gently, in drawing rooms, in whispered conversations, over tea, behind fans, behind smiles. She listens for the hints. A friend who speaks too fondly of her tonic, a woman whose hands shake slightly when her cup is empty, a lady who excuses herself too often during visits. Eleanor offers sympathy. Eleanor offers understanding. Eleanor offers a name, Captain Morrison, a private source, reliable, discreet. The women look at her, startled, then relieved, then afraid, and then they nod. Because they are drowning too, and any hand, offered even a hand that leads deeper, looks like rescue. This is how the epidemic spreads in respectable circles. Not through violence, not through street deals, but through whispered kindness that carries poison. Eleanor hates herself for it. She hates herself in the quiet moments when the drug has worn thin and her mind is sharp enough to feel guilt. But then she takes another dose, and the guilt becomes soft, distant, like a bad dream you can't quite remember. Her husband begins to notice other changes now. Not the drug, not directly. He notices absences. He notices forgotten conversations. He notices that Eleanor sometimes stares at nothing, her face serene in a way that feels wrong. He asks if she is all right. Eleanor says yes. She says it with perfect softness, perfect calm. And he believes her because he wants to, because the alternative is unthinkable. Sometimes, at night, when the house is quiet and the servants have retired to their quarters, Eleanor sits by the window with a candle beside her. The flame trembles in the draught. The glass reflects her face, pale, a little hollow, eyes too bright. She watches the fog drift past, and she thinks about all the women she has introduced to Morrison. She imagines them in their own bedrooms, their own hidden bottles, their own private shame. She wonders if she has become part of the machine that will kill them. And then she hears the clock, tick, tick, tick. Her hands move, almost without her permission, toward the place where the bottle is hidden. Because the body does not care about morality. The body cares about relief. And in that quiet room, with the candle's thin light and the fog pressing against the glass, Eleanor takes her medicine and lets the warmth spread, and the guilt dissolves into sleepiness. It is not peace, but it feels like peace. And for someone who is exhausted, truly exhausted, that feeling is almost irresistible. There is a strange tenderness in the way Mary performs these errands. She leaves before dawn, when the cobblestones still hold the night's cold. Her boots make a small, honest sound, tap, tap, and it echoes between damp brick walls. The air tastes of soot and river fog. A shutter opens somewhere with a wooden groan, and the first warm breath of a bakery drifts out, sweet for a second, then swallowed by smoke. Morrison's place has a side door, narrow and stubborn in its frame. Inside, the scent changes. Pepper and tar, dried orange peel, and beneath it that sweet, earthy note Mary has learned to recognize without ever naming. A man takes her coin, slides a parcel across the counter as if sliding a secret. Twine bites lightly into her fingers as she carries it home. Eleanor waits until the corridor is quiet, until even the house seems to hold its breath. She sets the bottle on her dressing table where the candle can reach it. The glass catches the flame and turns it into amber. When she tilts the bottle, the liquid moves slowly, thick as honey that has forgotten how to be sweet. One drop, then another. Each drop makes a tiny ring in the water, spreading, fading, as if even the evidence is trying to disappear. She drinks. Bitterness first, then warmth, creeping behind her ribs, loosening the knots in her shoulders. The relief is so immediate, it feels like forgiveness. And that is what frightens me every time I picture it, how a poison can arrive with such gentleness. She watches herself in the mirror afterward, face pale, eyes too calm. Somewhere in the house a clock counts with patient certainty, and Eleanor listens, not to time, but to distance from the next dose. She tells herself she will stop tomorrow. Tomorrow is always clean, always untouched. Tonight, she lets the candle burn lower and lower, and lets the room grow soft around her. The most frightening thing about Victorian medicine is not always the drug. Sometimes it is the paperwork, a signature, a letter, a doctor's confident hand writing a woman out of her own life. I always feel a chill when I think about that, how quiet the mechanism is. No shackles clanking down a hallway, no dramatic verdict shouted in a courtroom, just ink drying on paper while the kettle whistles in the kitchen and the servants continue dusting the banister as if the world is not about to change. For Eleanor, the change begins with a whisper from below stairs. Servants talk. They do it the way steam rises from a pot, inevitable, shapeless, hard to stop once it begins. A footman mentions the odd errands. A housemaid mentions bottles found behind books. Someone notices that Mary returns from the city with parcels too often for any normal household remedy. Eleanor's husband hears fragments. At first he dismisses them. He has been trained, like most men of his class, to believe that a respectable home is stable by definition. A good wife is good because she is a wife. The very title is supposed to be proof. But then he sees her one evening in the drawing room, sitting perfectly still, with a book open on her lap, eyes fixed on a page she is not reading. The fire pops, the coal shifts, the light flickers across her face, and he realizes she is not asleep, she is somewhere else, somewhere unreachable. He says her name. Eleanor blinks slowly, as if returning from a deep pool. She smiles, too serene, too delayed. He asks her what she has taken. Eleanor laughs softly. It's the wrong sound. It slips out of her like fog. It's only my medicine, she says, for my nerves. The phrase sounds innocent. It has saved thousands of women. It has buried thousands of women. He calls the physician. A respectable doctor arrives the next day, carrying his leather bag like a symbol of authority. He smells faintly of lavender soap and tobacco. He speaks in calm tones, looking at Eleanor the way one looks at a delicate clock that has begun to lose time. He asks questions. Eleanor answers politely, too politely, as if politeness could protect her from diagnosis. How often do you take your drops? Only as prescribed. Do you ever feel compelled? No, doctor. And in that moment, what is true becomes less important than what is useful. Eleanor is lying, and she knows it. The doctor knows it too, in some dim, uncomfortable way. The husband wants to believe the lie, because believing it allows him to keep his world arranged. So the doctor chooses a path that preserves respectability. He calls it nervous exhaustion, hysteria, female weakness, words that sound like silk, words that function like chains. He recommends rest, isolation, a private facility, not a public hospital, never that. Respectable women do not lie beside charity cases and criminals. A private asylum, then, a sanitarium with gardens and quiet corridors, a place where the family can say she is taking the waters or resting her nerves, while the truth stays hidden behind hedges and locked doors. Eleanor hears the recommendation and feels her stomach drop. She has imagined many endings: overdose, scandal, slow decay. But something about being moved, packaged, transported like furniture that terrifies her more. Because in that world, a married woman's consent is not required. Her husband can sign, the doctor can certify, and Eleanor can be taken. The day she is sent away is grey and damp, the kind of day London seems built for. Fog presses into the streets, turning carriages into ghosts. Eleanor's trunk is packed by servants with careful efficiency, nightgowns folded, hairbrush wrapped, a Bible placed on top like a blessing. Eleanor stands in her bedroom and watches them. She wants to scream that the Bible is a joke, that prayer has never cured a craving. But she says nothing. Her throat feels tight and dry. Mary helps her dress. Mary's hands tremble slightly as she ties the ribbon at Eleanor's collar. Their eyes meet in the mirror, and for a second there is something raw there: fear, guilt, loyalty, grief. Mary whispers, "I'm sorry." Eleanor doesn't answer. If she answers, she might break. She rides to the facility in a closed carriage. The wheels hiss over wet stone. The sound is steady, hypnotic, like rain on a roof. Eleanor watches the city blur through the small window and tries to memorize it. Gas lamps, iron railings, the shape of rooftops dissolving into mist. Part of her believes she is seeing London for the last time. The sanitarium is set back from the road, hidden behind trees that drip with moisture. The building is handsome, respectable, almost beautiful, clean brick, tall windows, a garden path lined with winter bare hedges. And yet, the moment Eleanor steps inside, The air changes. It smells of carbolic, boiled linens, and something faintly sour beneath fear, perhaps absorbed into walls. A matron greets her with a smile that does not reach her eyes. The matron's keys clink softly at her waist, a small, constant sound. Eleanor notices it immediately. That sound becomes a new kind of clock. Key, key, key. Eleanor is led down a corridor that is too quiet. The carpets swallow footsteps. The windows are high enough that you can see light, but not the world. Somewhere a woman coughs. Somewhere a door closes with a cushioned thud. Eleanor's room is small but orderly. A bed, a chair, a washstand. The curtains are thin. The wallpaper is bland. It is designed to be soothing, which means it is designed to be empty. The first night, Eleanor asks for her medicine. The nurse brings it, measured, controlled. The nurse watches her swallow. That is the first lesson. Here the drug is still present, but it is no longer hers. Even dependence is supervised. Doctor. Blackwell, the facility's director, meets her the next morning. He is a man with a gentle voice and firm belief. He speaks of moral strength as if it is a muscle, and of feminine virtue as if it is a diagnosis. We will reduce your dose, he says, smiling, gradually, kindly. You will learn to rely on God and discipline rather than artificial comforts. Artificial comforts. As if Eleanor's craving is a frivolity. The reduction begins. At first it seems manageable. A fewer drops, a slightly longer wait. Eleanor tells herself she can endure. She sits in the garden wrapped in a shawl, watching frost dissolve on the grass as the sun rises. The air is crisp, clean, almost pleasant. But then the body notices withdrawal is not polite. It does not care that Eleanor is in a tidy room with lace curtains. It arrives like a storm moving in under the skin. Her legs ache with a deep, crawling discomfort. Her stomach churns. Sweat beads at her hairline, even in the cold. At night, she cannot find rest. The sheets feel like they are made of sand. Her thoughts race and loop, returning again and again to the image of the bottle. Sometimes she hears other women crying down the corridor. Soft sobs, quickly muffled. Sometimes she hears laughter, sudden and strange, as if someone has slipped into a dream and cannot find the exit. During the day, they are made to follow a routine. Prayer in the morning, reading in the afternoon, domestic instruction, sewing, needlework, gentle chores, because the institution believes that proper femininity will rebuild a shattered mind. Eleanor does as she is told. She folds linens, she threads needles. Her fingers tremble so badly that the thread slips again and again, and each failure feels like a judgment. She writes reflections in a notebook because Dr. Blackwell insists the reflections are meant to be sincere. Eleanor learns quickly which words please the staff. Repentance, humility, gratitude. She writes them, and then late at night, she whispers the truth into the pillow so no one can hear. I would trade all of your gratitude for one full dose. Somewhere in the facility is a room for difficult cases. Eleanor hears about it in hushed tones from another patient, a woman with greying hair and bright, frightened eyes. The woman says her husband sent her here because she drank too much laudanum before bed and woke screaming from hallucinations. They keep you asleep in there, she whispers. They call it treatment. They call it mercy. Eleanor shivers. She tries to be compliant. She tries to be the kind of patient who earns trust, who earns a little freedom, who is allowed to walk in the garden without supervision. But there is a problem with institutions. They do not know the difference between a woman who is recovering and a woman who is performing recovery. Eleanor performs. She smiles. She prays. She speaks softly about moral lessons. Inside, her mind counts. Minutes, hours, drops. The cravings come in waves. Sometimes they are physical, an ache in her bones, nausea, the sense that her skin is too tight. Sometimes they are emotional, an overwhelming grief that seems to have no source, as if the drug has been holding back sorrow for years and now the dam has cracked. She thinks of her children. She thinks of their hands, small, warm, reaching for her. She wonders what they have been told. That mother is resting. That mother is ill. That mother is unfit. In the evenings, she watches the sunset through the high window. The sky turns a bruised purple, then fades to grey. She can't see the streets. She can't see the river. She can't see the life beyond. That is another lesson. The world continues without you. There are other women here too, not just Eleanor. Not just one tragedy. A banker's wife who began with drops for her nerves after childbirth. A clergyman's daughter who used a cordial for headaches and now cannot read a page without forgetting it. A young widow who found opium in grief and now cannot find herself without it. They share stories in fragments. Careful, because walls in such places have ears. Sometimes, in the quiet, between scheduled activities, they sit together and say nothing at all. The silence becomes a kind of companionship, a recognition. I always find that the saddest part, not the drug itself, but how lonely it makes people. Even when surrounded by others, they are locked inside their own measurement of need. Weeks pass. Eleanor's dose is reduced again and again. Her body begins to adapt in the way bodies do when forced. The worst of the sweating fades. The nausea comes and goes. She sleeps, sometimes, in shallow stretches. But something else changes too. Without the drug's soft veil, Eleanor begins to feel everything she has been avoiding. The years of pressure, the swallowed anger, the exhaustion of performing cheerfulness for a society that demands it, the quiet, constant fear of being judged, of failing, of not being enough. The opium did not create all of that. It only covered it. Now the cover is being pulled away, and Eleanor lies exposed beneath it. One afternoon, Dr. Blackwell tells her she is improving. He says it as if he has conquered her. "You will be well," he says. "Your husband will be pleased." Eleanor nods. And inside, she feels something cold, because she understands that wellness in this world means obedience. It means returning to her role. It does not mean freedom. She returns to her room that night and sits on the edge of the bed. The mattress springs whisper. She looks at her hands, thin, trembling slightly. She thinks of Captain Morrison's ledgers. She thinks of the women she recruited. She thinks of Mary walking through fog with parcels tied in twine. She wonders if she has been cured or simply relocated. And in the corridor, the matron's keys clink again, that small metallic reminder. Key, key, key. Eleanor closes her eyes and listens, letting the sound wash over her like a lullaby made of iron. On the third day, when the dose drops again, Eleanor learns the geography of craving. It starts behind the eyes, a pressure like a headache that never quite becomes pain. Then it slides down into the throat, a dryness that no water fixes. Then it reaches the chest, a fluttering anxiety that makes breathing feel like work. After that, it moves into the belly, twisting there, turning hunger into nausea, nausea into a hollow emptiness that feels personal, almost insulting. Meals arrive on trays, oat porridge that steams faintly, weak tea that tastes of metal, bread that is a little stale at the edges. Eleanor forces herself to eat because the nurses insist, because refusing would be noted, because notes become evidence. She chews slowly, listening to the scrape of spoon against bowl, to the quiet murmur of the corridor outside, to the way the building holds sound and then swallows it. At night, the facility is never truly silent. Pipes tick as they cool. A distant faucet drips. Somewhere a woman walks in slippers, shuffling, shuffling, shuffling. The rhythm can almost be soothing until you realize it is a woman who cannot sleep, pacing the edge of her own mind. Eleanor presses her palm to the wall beside her bed. The plaster is cool, slightly damp. She tries to imagine the outside air, the smell of London rain, the familiar chaos. She tries to imagine that she is still part of it. The thought is strangely comforting and strangely cruel, because comfort here is not allowed to last. There is a particular kind of shame that thrives in clean places, not the loud public shame of a courtroom, not the dramatic shame of scandal splashed across papers. This is quieter. It lives in corridors that smell of boiled linens. It lives in the soft scrape of slippers on carpet. It lives in the way a nurse lowers her voice when she says your name, as if your name itself has become an illness. Eleanor begins to understand that Willowbrook, this sanitarium with its trimmed hedges and high windows, does not simply treat the body. It rearranges the story. It takes a woman and edits her until she fits the shape the world can tolerate. In the mornings, the staff wake the patients early. A bell, small and bright, rings somewhere down the hall. It is not a harsh sound. That's part of the cruelty. It sounds almost pleasant, like a school bell calling children to lesson. Eleanor sits up in bed and feels her bones complain. The sheets are crisp, too crisp, as if they have never been wrinkled by ordinary sleep. She swings her feet to the floor, and the cold bites the soles of her skin. The chill travels up her legs in a thin line. She stands slowly. If she stands too fast, the room tilts. If she stands too slow, the nurse will appear in the doorway, watching, evaluating, writing invisible notes in her mind. In the washroom, the water is cold, then lukewarm, then cold again. It never commits. Eleanor splashes her face and watches droplets cling to her eyelashes. Her reflection looks like a woman she once knew and now cannot fully remember. The cheeks are narrower, the eyes are larger in a tired way. The mouth holds itself tight, as if even her lips have learned discipline. Breakfast is served in a communal room with pale curtains and a long table. The table is scrubbed so clean it reflects the dull morning light. There is porridge, thin and grey. There is bread that tastes of nothing. There is tea that tastes of metal. The women eat quietly. At first, Eleanor thought this silence was politeness. Now she knows it is fear. In places like this, words are risky. Words become evidence. Words become symptoms. Still, there are moments when whispers escape, quick as sparrows. A woman across the table, Lady Margaret Ashworth, committed by a husband who could not bear the embarrassment of her dependence, leans slightly toward Eleanor one morning. Margaret's hands shake as she lifts her spoon, but her eyes are sharp, almost defiant. "They reduced you again," Margaret murmurs. Eleanor nods. She can feel the reduction, like a missing stair beneath her foot. Margaret's mouth twitches into something like a smile, but it carries no joy. They call it kindness. That's what they always call it. Eleanor doesn't answer. She feels the desire to speak rise in her throat, an urge to confess, to rage, to demand. Then she swallows it down because the nurse is nearby, pretending not to listen. After breakfast, there is prayer. The chapel is small and bright. Sunlight slides through glass and lands in soft rectangles on the floor. The benches smell faintly of polished wood and old hymns. The minister speaks in a voice designed to soothe. He tells them suffering is a test. He tells them weakness is an invitation to grace. Eleanor sits with her hands folded and wonders, not for the first time, whether God can recognize a woman who has been medicated into obedience. You know that strange sensation when you try to pray but the mind keeps slipping away. It drifts toward the body, toward the ache in the legs, toward the twist in the gut, toward the craving that is not spiritual at all. Eleanor keeps her face calm keeps her lips still, and inside she thinks, if prayer cured withdrawal, there would be no addicts. The thought feels almost blasphemous. It also feels honest. After prayer, domestic instruction. It is a gentle phrase for something that feels like correction. A matron shows them how to fold linens with perfect corners, how to stitch small tears, how to arrange flowers in a vase, how to set a table with the right distance between plates. The idea, Dr. Blackwell explains, is that order outside will create order inside. Eleanor's fingers tremble as she threads a needle. The thread refuses to obey. She tries again. Her hands sweat. The needle slips and pricks her thumb. A bead of blood forms, bright and sudden. She watches it, fascinated, as if it belongs to someone else. The matron clucks softly. Careful, Mrs. Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell. Not Eleanor, not lady, not anything complicated. Just a name flattened into a category. Eleanor presses her thumb to a cloth and the blood stains it, a tiny red mark on white linen. She thinks, absurdly, how fitting it is. A small evidence of something real in a world that prefers everything spotless. Afternoons are for reading, carefully selected texts, moral tales, scriptures, poems that speak of duty and patience. Nothing too passionate, nothing too wild, nothing that might awaken a woman's inner fire. Eleanor sits by the high window with a book open, and she tries to read. The words move on the page. Her mind tries to hold them. Sometimes it succeeds for a few sentences, and she feels a spark of pride, a little flicker of self-returning. Then her thoughts slip, and she realizes she has been staring at the same paragraph for 10 minutes, absorbing nothing but the shape of letters. The nurse walks by. The nurse's shoes make a soft sound on the corridor floor. Eleanor listens to that sound and realizes she has begun to measure time by footsteps, by bells, by keys, by the quiet ritual noises of this place. In the evenings, the dose arrives. That is the cruel mercy. They do not take the opium away all at once. They let the body cling to it, then they loosen the grip, then they loosen again. Each reduction is a small death. Each reduction is a lesson. You do not control your own suffering. The nurse brings the medicine in a small glass, already measured. The liquid is amber, catching the lamplight. Eleanor can smell it before she drinks bitter sweetness, the scent of poppy dreams. Her mouth waters in a way that feels humiliating. The nurse watches her swallow. The nurse's gaze is professional, polite, indifferent. After the nurse leaves, Eleanor sits on her bed and waits for the warmth. It comes, not like it used to, not like a wave that erased everything, but like a thin blanket pulled over cold skin. It takes the sharpness off the ache. It softens the anxiety. It makes her eyelids heavier. It also makes her feel, briefly, that she might survive another day. That is the hook, isn't it? Survival offered in drops. But there is another hook in this place too, the fear of being labelled difficult. Eleanor has seen what happens to the difficult women. There is a wing at the far end of the building where the corridors smell stronger of carbolic and damp. The doors there are thicker. The windows are smaller. The nurses who work that wing do not smile. One night, Eleanor wakes to a sound that slices through sleep like a blade. A scream. Not a theatrical scream, not a scream of shock, a scream of pure bodily terror, raw and desperate, the sound of someone whose skin is on fire from the inside. Eleanor sits up, heart pounding. The scream comes again, then turns into sobbing, then into pleading words she cannot make out. She slips from bed and pads to the door, barefoot on cold floor. She presses her ear to the wood. Footsteps hurry down the corridor. Keys jangle. A door opens somewhere. Voices murmur low, firm, authoritative. Then silence. The silence after a scream is always worse. It feels like something has been smothered. In the morning, Eleanor asks Margaret Ashworth carefully what happened. Margaret's eyes flick away. "Mrs. Petong," she whispers, "the judge's daughter. She begged them to stop reducing. She said she would do anything. They said begging is a symptom." Eleanor feels her stomach drop. Where is she now? Margaret's lips press together. The difficult wing. The difficult wing. The phrase lands in Eleanor's mind like a stone. She begins to think about escape. Not dramatic escape. Not climbing walls. She knows there are no gaps, no easy doors. Escape, for a woman like Eleanor, is not a sprint through the night. It is paperwork. It is persuasion. It is presenting the right face until the right person signs the right paper. So she becomes the perfect patient. She writes her reflections with careful humility. She thanks Dr. Blackwell for his guidance. She speaks softly about lessons learned. She tells the minister she is grateful for prayer. Inside, she watches. She watches which nurses are kind. She watches which nurses can be bribed with warmth, with flattery, with a gentle acknowledgement that they, too, are tired. She watches when the matron's supervision loosens. She watches the rhythms of the building like a creature learning the habits of its cage. There is a young nurse, Miss Elkins, whose cheeks are still round with youth, whose eyes hold a flicker of compassion that has not yet been trained out. Eleanor notices that Miss Elkins lingers sometimes at the doorway, looking as if she wants to say something human. One evening, after the dose, Eleanor catches Miss Elkins alone in the corridor and speaks in a low voice. "I know you can't help me," Eleanor says. "I know you must follow rules. I'm not asking you to break them." Miss Elkins shifts, uneasy. "Mrs. Hartwell," Eleanor continues, voice soft, steady. "I only want to understand. When women leave here, do they truly leave, or do they simply become quiet somewhere else?" Miss Elkins looks down at her hands. Her fingers twist the edge of her apron. "Some leave," she whispers. "Some go home. And the others?" Miss Elkins' throat moves as she swallows. "Their families stop paying." The words are simple. They are devastating. Eleanor feels a coldness spread through her chest. Stop paying. As if her life is a bill. She thinks of her husband. She thinks of the expenses. The doctor's fees. The facility's fees. The quiet financial drain of secrecy. She thinks of how a man might decide, eventually, that an inconvenient wife is cheaper to replace than to cure. She smiles at Miss Elkins as if nothing has happened. She thanks her. She returns to her room and sits on the bed, staring at the wallpaper pattern until it blurs. For the first time since arriving, Eleanor feels a new kind of fear. Not fear of withdrawal, fear of being discarded. That fear sharpens her resolve. It makes her mind, even through the thin blanket of opium, become alert. She cannot rely on her husband's mercy. She cannot rely on Dr. Blackwell's competence. She cannot rely on society's compassion. If she survives, it will be because she becomes her own quiet conspirator. Weeks pass. Her dose is lowered again. She endures it with a face of calm. Her body shakes at night beneath the covers. She sweats, then chills. Her stomach cramps. Her legs twitch as if they belong to a restless animal. She bites the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. And gradually, very gradually, something shifts. The cravings do not vanish. They never vanish, not entirely, but they become less like a storm and more like weather, something that arrives, something that passes, something she can observe without drowning. She begins to sleep in longer stretches. She begins to eat without nausea. She begins to read a paragraph and remember it. These small victories feel strange. They do not feel like triumph. They feel like waking up in a room you have lived in for years and suddenly noticing the furniture again. One morning, Eleanor stands by the high window and sees a bird land on the bare branch of a tree outside. It is a small thing. The bird tilts its head, It fluffs its feathers. It looks entirely unconcerned with institutions. Eleanor watches it and feels tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer, aching beauty of something free. She whispers, barely audible, "I remember." The word is not a prayer. It is not a confession. It is a reclamation. But reclamation has consequences, because when a woman begins to return to herself, she begins to see clearly what has been done to her. Eleanor begins to think about Captain Morrison's ledger again. She begins to think about the women she recruited. She begins to think about the bottles hidden in velvet-lined boxes. She begins to think about how many respectable deaths have been certified as heart failure and nervous exhaustion. She begins to think about truth, and truth in Victorian society is dangerous. The facility cannot keep her forever without payment, but it can keep her long enough for the world to forget her. It can keep her long enough for her children to grow and stop waiting. It can keep her long enough for another woman to sit at her husband's table. Eleanor decides she will leave, not cured, not cleansed, not restored to innocent purity. She will leave as a woman who knows too much. She will leave as a woman who has felt the machine from the inside, heard its keys, tasted its controlled mercy. She will leave as quietly as she can, because loudness would destroy her. And yet, in the quiet, she carries something sharper than scandal. She carries memory, and memory, in the right hands, can be more dangerous than any drug. When Eleanor finally leaves Willowbrook, the air outside tastes like a forgotten language. It is winter, but not the clean postcard winter of snow and bright skies. It is London winter, wet, grey, smelling of coal smoke and damp wool. The carriage waiting for her is ordinary, closed, respectable. The driver tips his hat without looking too closely at her face, as if politeness requires blindness. Eleanor steps down the sanitarium's front steps and feels the stone beneath her boots. The ground is cold through the leather. She pauses, just for a moment, because her body does not trust movement yet. The world is larger than the corridors she has memorized. The sky feels too open. Behind her, the matron stands in the doorway, with her keys resting against her hip. The matron smiles. A practiced curve that means the institution has done its part. The matron says something about continued discipline, about avoiding overstimulation, about gratitude. Eleanor nods, because nodding is safer than speaking. She climbs into the carriage. The door closes with a soft, final sound. As the wheels begin to roll, Eleanor watches the sanitarium recede behind bare trees. The building becomes smaller, then hazier, then swallowed by fog. She feels an unexpected rush of dizziness, not from the drug, not now, but from the sheer fact of leaving. You'd think freedom would feel like joy. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, suddenly aware of how high you are. London greets her with noise. The rattle of wheels on cobblestones, the murmur of crowds, the distant shout of a vendor, the cough of a man in an alley, the hiss of a gas lamp being lit as afternoon darkens early. The city smells as it always has smoke, horse sweat, wet brick, the faint sweetness of bakery bread drifting out and then vanishing. Eleanor presses her gloved hand to the window glass and feels the cold seep into her palm. Her house appears through the fog like a memory made solid. The iron railings, the familiar steps, the door polished to a dull shine. Mary is waiting. Mary stands just inside the threshold, hands folded, face carefully arranged, but Eleanor sees the tremor in her lower lip, the way Mary's eyes glisten despite her attempt at composure. When Eleanor steps inside, Mary moves forward and then stops, unsure whether she is allowed to touch her mistress after all that has happened. The old rules still hover between them like ghosts. Eleanor makes the choice. She reaches out and squeezes Mary's hand just once. Mary's fingers are cold. The contact is brief, but it is human. Mary whispers, You're home. Eleanor wants to say yes. She wants to say home. She wants the word to mean what it used to mean. Instead, she says softly, I'm here. Because home is not a place, not anymore. Home is a condition, and Eleanor does not yet know if she can inhabit it. Her husband greets her in the drawing room. He looks older than she remembers, or perhaps she is seeing him more clearly now. His hairline has retreated. His eyes hold that careful mixture of relief and discomfort a man wears when confronted with a problem he would rather call solved. He kisses her cheek. His lips are dry. His hand lingers on her shoulder a moment too long, as if he is checking whether she is solid, whether she will vanish again. You look better, he says. Eleanor smiles, a small smile, the kind that keeps peace. I'm stronger, she replies, and it is true in ways he cannot imagine. The first days at home are strange. The house is the same, but Eleanor is not. The familiar rooms feel slightly misaligned, as if furniture has shifted in her absence. The wallpaper patterns are too busy, the ticking clocks are too loud, the silverware clinks too sharply against plates. Each sound feels amplified, like her senses have been scrubbed raw. At night she lies in her own bed and listens to the house breathe, pipes sigh. Floorboards creak. A carriage passes outside, and the faint vibration travels through the brick. Eleanor's body still expects the controlled dose, the measured mercy. Her muscles tighten with anticipation of craving. Sometimes the craving comes anyway, not violent, not like the early days, but like a shadow sliding into the room. A thought, one drop would make this easier. A thought, one bottle could soften the edges. Eleanor closes her eyes and lets the thought pass. She focuses on her breath. In, out, in, out. She learns that recovery is not a single victory. It is 1,000 small refusals, quiet, almost invisible. But the world does not let her recover in peace. Letters arrive, bills, invitations, condolences for her illness. The social network, that polite machine, begins to test whether Eleanor still fits. A friend visits with flowers and concerned eyes. She speaks too brightly, as if brightness can erase discomfort. She asks about Willowbrook, about treatments, about whether Eleanor feels restored. Eleanor answers gently, giving the expected phrases: rest, fresh air, prayer, discipline. Her friend nods, relieved. The fiction holds. After the friend leaves, Eleanor stands in the hallway holding the bouquet. The flowers smell sweet and alive. She looks at them and feels something like anger rise. How easy it is for society to accept a lie if the lie preserves decorum. Eleanor begins to think of the women still trapped, Margaret Ashworth, Mrs. Peyton in the difficult wing, the countless nameless ladies whose bottles hide behind books, whose servants run errands through fog, whose husbands sign papers and call it care. Eleanor thinks of Captain Morrison, of his neat coded ledger, of his quiet threats. And something inside her that once wanted only relief begins to want something else. It wants reckoning, not loud public reckoning. Eleanor is not foolish. She knows what happens to women who speak too loudly. They are called hysterical, unstable, unfit. So she chooses a different path. She begins with Mary. One evening, when the house is quiet and her husband is at his club, Eleanor sits by the small fire in her bedroom. The flame is modest, but it throws warmth into the room. Candlelight trembles on the mantel. Mary stands near the door, hesitant, as if waiting for instructions. Eleanor says softly, sit. Mary sits on the edge of a chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap as if she is still on duty. Eleanor takes a breath. She feels the old shame stir. She lets it rise, then lets it settle. I need you to tell me everything, Eleanor says. Not what you think I want to hear. What happened while I was gone. The errands, Morrison, the letters. Mary's face pales. Her eyes flick to the door, as if fearing someone might hear. He'll ruin you, Mary whispers. Eleanor nods. He tried already. I know. Mary's shoulders sag, the posture of someone carrying too many secrets for too long. She begins to speak, slowly, haltingly. She tells Eleanor about the parcels, about the anonymous notes, about the way Morrison's prices rose, about the names she was asked to deliver to him, other ladies, other houses, other discreet doorways. Mary admits she saw women in carriages at the warehouse, faces hidden behind veils. Eleanor listens. She feels sick. She feels calm. Both at once, that strange duality recovery rings. The ability to face ugliness without immediately fleeing into sedation. When Mary finishes, Eleanor sits in silence for a long time. The fire pops softly. A coal collapses, releasing a brief spark. Eleanor says, at last, he has a ledger. Mary nods. I've seen it. Not the whole thing, but yes. The ledger is power. The ledger is proof. The ledger is danger. Eleanor decides she will find it. Not because she wants revenge, not even because she wants justice in the grand sense. She wants leverage. She wants a way to loosen the net around other women's throats. Over the next weeks, Eleanor moves carefully. She writes letters to acquaintances. She visits a Quaker woman she once met at a charity event, Mrs. Fielding, a woman with plain clothing and steady eyes, whose faith has always seemed less concerned with appearances and more concerned with truth. Eleanor does not confess everything. She offers fragments, hints. She asks questions about addiction as illness, not sin. She listens to Mrs. Fielding speak of compassion, of communities that help without humiliating. Eleanor feels a small warmth in her chest that has nothing to do with opium. She begins to understand that there are people who will not punish her for telling the truth, if she tells it carefully, if she tells it to the right ears. Through Mrs. Fielding, Eleanor is introduced to a doctor who is unusual. Dr. Hartley, a physician who has seen enough nervous exhaustion to suspect the real culprit. A man who keeps private journals. A man whose eyes hold tired honesty rather than confident ignorance. Eleanor meets him in a modest office that smells of ink and antiseptic. Rain taps against the window. Dr. Hartley offers her tea. The tea tastes strong and real. He listens as Eleanor speaks. She speaks slowly. She chooses words like stepping stones. She does not dramatize. She does not beg. She says, I have seen women destroyed by laudanum and its cousins. I have seen it hidden under velvet and etiquette. I have seen institutions treat it as moral failure. Doctor. Hartley's jaw tightens. He does not look surprised. He looks sad, as if she is confirming a grief he has carried alone. He says, quietly, you are not the first to tell me, but you may be the first who can help me prove it. Prove it. There is that word again. Proof. The ledger. They make a plan. Careful. Slow. Mary, with trembling courage, agrees to help. She knows the warehouse routines. She knows the side door. She knows which clerk takes bribes and which one looks away. One foggy evening, Eleanor dresses in plain clothing. A dark cloak, a simple bonnet. Her heart beats hard, not with craving, but with fear. Fear and purpose are similar, I've noticed. Both make you very awake. She rides in a hired carriage, not her own. She keeps her face turned away from windows. London at night is a blur of gaslight halos and whetstone. The warehouse district smells of river mud and tar. The air is cold enough to sting. Eleanor steps down and her boots sink slightly into damp grit. Her breath appears in front of her like smoke. Mary leads her to the side door. The door frame is warped. The wood is slick with moisture. Mary knocks in a particular rhythm, two quick, one slow. A man opens. He does not look at Eleanor's face too closely. He looks at the coin Mary slips into his palm. Inside, the warehouse is dim. Lanterns throw weak circles of light. Stacks of crates rise like shadows. The air is thick with spices, and that other sweetness underneath. Eleanor's stomach twists. The scent is familiar in the worst way. It calls to the part of her brain that still remembers relief. She steadies herself. She focuses on her breath. They move quietly between crates. Somewhere in the building a man laughs. Somewhere glass clinks. The sound is casual, careless, as if the business of ruin is no more serious than the business of tea. Mary leads Eleanor to a small office at the back. The door is closed. A key hangs on a hook nearby. Mary's hand shakes as she takes it. Eleanor whispers, slowly. The key slides into the lock. It turns with a soft click. The door opens. The office smells of paper and tobacco and ink. A desk sits under a small lamp. There are shelves lined with ledgers. Eleanor's pulse pounds in her ears. She feels the moment stretching, slowing, as if time itself is holding its breath. Mary points. That one, she whispers. A leather-bound book, thick, worn at the corners. Ledger. Eleanor reaches for it. The leather is cool under her glove. She lifts it and feels its weight, heavy with names, heavy with secrets. For a brief second, Eleanor is tempted to open it, to read, to see the coded list of women. But she knows she cannot stand here long. Curiosity is dangerous. Time is dangerous. She tucks the ledger into her cloak. Then footsteps sound outside. Voices. Someone approaching. Mary's eyes widen. Eleanor's body flashes with fear, so sharp it feels like a drug. Her mind becomes suddenly clear, painfully clear. They slip out of the office, pulling the door closed behind them. The key rattles in Mary's fingers. She hangs it back. She tries to steady her breathing. The voices pass. A man complains about shipments. Another laughs. The sound fades. Eleanor and Mary move like shadows through the warehouse until the side door appears again. Cold air hits Eleanor's face, and she almost gasps with relief. They step out into fog. The carriage is waiting down the street. Eleanor walks quickly, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Her cloak clings damply to her skirt. She feels the ledger pressed against her ribs as if it has become a second heart. In the carriage, Eleanor finally allows herself to exhale. The breath shakes. Mary looks at her, eyes wide, terrified, exhilarated. Eleanor whispers, "We have it." What happens next is not dramatic justice, not in the way stories like to pretend. The ledger becomes a quiet tool. Doctor Hartley uses it to confront certain physicians who have been complacent. He does it carefully, privately, threatening exposure of complicity. Some are horrified, some deny, some pay to keep their names out of scandal, but a few, just a few, begin to change how they prescribe, begin to warn, begin to hesitate. Mrs. Fielding and her Quaker circle use the information to reach out to wives, daughters, servants. They offer discreet support, safe places to speak, simple instructions for tapering without panic, understanding without moral lashes. Eleanor does not become a public hero. Victorian society does not reward women who touch the underbelly of respectability. But Eleanor becomes something else. She becomes a quiet lantern in a foggy street, not bright enough to draw crowds, bright enough for one lost person to find the next step. Sometimes, in the late evening, Eleanor sits by her own small fire, listening to the soft crackle of wood. The room is dim, candlelight flickers. Outside, London breathes in its damp, smoky way. She thinks of the women she cannot save, the ones already buried under euphemisms, the ones whose death certificates read heart failure and brain fever and nervous exhaustion. She thinks of the women she might still reach. She feels the old craving sometimes like a whisper at the edge of consciousness. When it comes, she does not panic. She does not pretend she is pure. She simply acknowledges it, like acknowledging a scar. And then she lets it pass, breathing slowly, letting the warmth of the fire replace the warmth of the drug. If you are listening to this with your eyes heavy, with your body sinking into your sheets, I want you to notice something. Notice how the darkness of this story is not the sudden jump scare kind of darkness. It is the slow darkness, the polite darkness, the darkness that arrives in teaspoons and signatures and quiet corridors. And notice too how even in that darkness there can be small lights, a servant's loyalty, a doctor's tired honesty, a community that chooses compassion over shame, a woman who learns to survive, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming awake. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Let the fog soften the edges. Let the fire's imaginary warmth loosen your shoulders. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest. The world outside your room is far away. The coal smoke, the ledger, the keys, they can stay at a distance now. You have done enough for tonight. Just listen to the quiet. Listen to your own breathing. Let the darkness become gentle. Good night.